If you believe in destiny and stories of enduring love, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. New and original tales of romance are shared here every day, each more heartwarming than the last. Autumn unfolded slowly in her small town, painting the streets in amber and gold, and filling the air with a quiet, reflective calm that made even familiar places feel cinematic. It was the season of waiting, of letters written late at night and mornings spent checking the mailbox with a hopeful heart. In that gentle stillness, her life had been shaped for 3 long years by words written by a man she had never met, a man whose presence existed only through ink, paper, and the unspoken language of longing. Their correspondence began almost by accident. A community writing project, a shared interest in literature, a simple exchange meant to last only a few weeks. But something in his first letter lingered with her. He wrote from far away, from another part of the United States where he lived temporarily to study, describing quiet libraries, cold evenings, and the strange loneliness of being far from home. His words were thoughtful, unguarded, and kind. She answered because she felt seen. He wrote back because her response carried warmth and curiosity, and soon letters became rituals, arriving like silent promises that distance could not erase. Over time, their connection deepened into something intimate and steady. They shared memories, dreams, disappointments, and small daily details that made each other's worlds feel closer. She wrote about her family, her routines, the comfort of her hometown. He wrote about his ambitions, his doubts, and the way her letters grounded him when everything else felt uncertain. The observer of destiny would say that love took root long before either of them dared to name it. There was no physical touch, no shared space, yet devotion grew quietly, patiently, with a faith that felt almost sacred. After 3 years, the decision to meet felt inevitable. He wrote to her with careful excitement, asking if he could finally come see her, his words trembling between hope and fear. She said yes, without hesitation, though her heart raced at the thought of turning written intimacy into reality. The day he arrived, autumn seemed to pause. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and the town looked suddenly smaller, more exposed, as if it were holding its breath alongside her. Their first meeting happened not in some grand setting, but on a quiet street near her home. When she saw him step out of the car, holding a small bag and looking uncertain, recognition washed over her, not of his face, but of his presence. He smiled, shy and earnest, and she knew instantly that the man from her letters was real, standing before her with the same gentleness she had felt for years. Conversation flowed easily, laughter softening their nerves. It felt like a fateful encounter that had been rehearsed through ink and patience. Later that afternoon, she invited him to her house to meet her parents, believing it was the natural next step. Inside, the familiar warmth of her home wrapped around them, and for a brief moment, everything felt safe. Then she spoke his full name aloud, introducing him formally. The room shifted. Her parents exchanged glances that carried history and tension. Her mother's expression tightened, color draining from her face. The surname, once just a word on a page, now carried weight. It belonged to a family her own had been at odds with for decades, a feud born of old grievances and unhealed wounds. Silence filled the room. Questions followed, sharp and immediate. He stood frozen, realizing too late the significance of what had just been revealed. Her mother spoke firmly, her voice shaped by years of resentment, declaring that this relationship could not continue. Love, she insisted, did not erase history. Pain did not vanish simply because hearts wished it away. He was asked to leave, not with cruelty, but with a finality that felt heavier than anger. That evening, he went to stay with his relatives, whose family home was also in the same town. A painful irony neither of them had anticipated. She stood at her bedroom window long after dark, clutching one of his letters, realizing that the obstacle they now faced was larger than distance ever had been. It was rooted in blood, memory, and generations of silence. Yet even then, as fear and doubt settled in, neither of them could deny the truth that had already been written between them. Their love had survived years apart. Now it would have to face the weight of history itself. And Destiny, watching closely, knew that this was only the beginning of a far greater test. The days that followed carried a tension that pressed quietly against every hour, as though the town itself were aware of the line that had been crossed. Late autumn deepened into colder mornings, and the warmth that once surrounded her home felt suddenly conditional, guarded by rules shaped long before she was born. Her mother's prohibition was firm, spoken not in anger, but in the weary certainty of someone who believed history could not be rewritten without cost. She reminded her daughter of old betrayals, of families divided, of wounds that had never fully healed. Love, she said, was not enough to erase what blood remembered. He felt the weight of that history the moment he crossed the threshold of his relative's house. Though they welcomed him kindly, there was an unspoken understanding in their glances, a recognition that his arrival had stirred something fragile. His family knew the feud well. They had learned to live around it, to avoid certain streets, certain names, certain conversations. Hearing her name spoken aloud brought back memories he had never personally lived, but somehow inherited. And yet, none of it diminished what he felt. If anything, it clarified it. Loving her had never been easy, but it had always been certain. They found ways to see each other anyway. Quiet walks at the edge of town, conversations whispered over the phone late at night, letters that now carried urgency instead of longing. Each meeting felt like a small act of defiance, not reckless but deliberate. She struggled with guilt, torn between loyalty to her family and devotion to the man whose words had shaped her heart for years. He struggled with restraint, knowing that pushing too hard could deepen the divide and confirm every fear their families held. Still, they persisted, bound by a silent promise made long before either understood the cost of keeping it. Pressure mounted as winter approached. Her mother watched her closely, sensing the distance growing between them. Arguments surfaced, quiet at first, then sharper. She was accused of naivete, of choosing romance over responsibility. Her mother spoke of sacrifice, of protecting the family from reopening old wounds. She listened, heart aching, because she understood the fear behind those words. But she also knew that walking away now would mean denying the truth of what she felt, and of who she had become through loving him. He, too, faced counsel meant to protect rather than encourage. Relatives warned him that staying could isolate him, that love born in letters might not survive the reality of divided families. They reminded him that peace had been hard-won through avoidance, not confrontation. But the observer of destiny could see that avoidance had only delayed the reckoning. He answered their concerns with calm resolve, explaining that love, when honest, deserved a chance to be seen, not hidden. As weeks turned into months, their bond was tested by exhaustion and doubt. There were nights when she questioned whether persistence was worth the pain it caused those she loved. There were moments when he wondered if asking her to stand beside him was unfair. Yet every time uncertainty crept in, they returned to the same truth. What they shared was not impulsive or fleeting. It had been built slowly, carefully, through years of vulnerability and trust. That kind of love does not vanish simply because it is inconvenient. Winter arrived with its sharp clarity, stripping the trees bare and revealing what could no longer be concealed. The approaching holidays intensified everything. The thought of spending Christmas apart, of choosing sides, felt unbearable. And yet, beneath the strain, something began to shift. Small conversations softened, old stories were revisited. Questions were asked not to accuse, but to understand. The feud, once unquestioned, began to feel heavier than the love it was meant to protect. Destiny lingered in those moments, watching persistence do its quiet work. Because sometimes the longest waits are not about time, but about hearts learning to release what no longer serves them. The first snow fell quietly, settling over the town like a fragile truce, and with it came a stillness that demanded honesty. Winter has a way of confronting what has been avoided, and for her family, the past could no longer remain buried beneath routine and resentment. The tension reached its breaking point on an evening when she finally gathered the courage to speak openly with her mother, her voice steady despite the fear pressing against her chest. She spoke not in defense of rebellion, but in defense of truth. She spoke of the letters, of the years spent learning who he was without appearances or influence, of the devotion that had grown patiently and respectfully long before either family re-entered the picture. Her mother listened in silence, arms crossed, eyes distant. Old memories surfaced, arguments long forgotten, misunderstandings passed down like inheritance, pride disguised as protection. When her daughter finished speaking, the room felt heavier, as though the walls themselves were waiting for an answer. Her mother finally admitted that the feud had never truly been about hatred, but about wounds that had never been allowed to heal. Hearing her daughter speak with such clarity unsettled her. Love built slowly, without deceit or recklessness, did not fit the narrative she had carried for years. At the same time, he faced his own reckoning. A family gathering brought the past into sharp focus when an older relative spoke openly for the first time about the origin of the conflict. It was not a single betrayal, but a chain of prideful decisions, misunderstandings hardened into certainty. He realized then that the feud survived only because no one had ever dared to question it. That realization changed him. He asked, gently but firmly, whether preserving old resentment was truly worth sacrificing a future shaped by sincerity and love. The confrontation between the families did not come as an explosion, but as an invitation. It began with a hesitant phone call, then a carefully arranged meeting at a neutral place, a small cafe on the edge of town, quiet and unassuming. When they sat across from one another, decades of history weighed heavily between them. Words came slowly at first, guarded and cautious, but as stories were shared, truths emerged that had been buried under assumptions. Regret softened voices. Apologies surfaced, imperfect, but sincere. She and he waited nearby, not intruding, but present, united. Their hands intertwined beneath the table were a silent promise that whatever happened, they would face it together. When the families finally acknowledged the damage caused by years of silence, something shifted. The obstacle that had defined their lives for generations began to loosen its grip. Acceptance did not arrive fully formed, but it arrived honestly. That night, as they walked through the snow-lit streets, she felt a release she had never known. Fear no longer guided her steps. He felt it too, a quiet relief, tempered by humility. Love had not demanded victory. It had demanded courage, patience, and truth. Destiny, watching closely, recognized the moment for what it was. Not the end of conflict, but the moment it lost its power. And with that, the path toward reconciliation lay open, ready for love to claim it fully. The final weeks of the year arrived wrapped in soft lights and cautious hope, as December settled over the town with a gentler kind of cold. Holiday decorations appeared slowly, wreaths on doors, warm lights in windows, small signs that hearts were beginning to open where resistance once lived. After the meeting between the families, nothing was suddenly perfect, but everything was undeniably different. Conversations that once ended in silence now lingered a little longer. Invitations, once unthinkable, were considered carefully instead of dismissed outright. Love, having endured distance and history, was finally being allowed to breathe. She noticed the change first in her mother's quiet gestures, a question asked without suspicion, a comment softened by curiosity. One evening, as snow tapped lightly against the windows, her mother asked about him, not his family name, but who he was. She spoke honestly about his patience, his kindness, the way his letters had taught her how deeply someone could listen. Her mother listened, not interrupting, as if realizing for the first time that the love her daughter defended was not reckless, but rooted. It was then that the final wall began to crack. He experienced a similar shift. His relatives spoke less of old wrongs and more of possibilities. There was a humility in their voices, an understanding that time had carried away the urgency of anger, but left behind the cost of holding on to it. When the idea of a shared holiday was mentioned, carefully, almost fearfully, he felt a quiet gratitude settle in his chest. It was not triumph he wanted, only peace. The invitation came simply: Christmas dinner, together, no speeches, no conditions, just an offer to sit at the same table and see what remained after pride stepped aside. On the evening they arrived, the house glowed with warmth, familiar scents drifting through the air. There was tension, yes, but also something new, expectation shaped by hope instead of fear. When he stepped inside, eyes met cautiously, then softened. Polite greetings gave way to genuine smiles. The past lingered, but it no longer dominated the room. As dinner unfolded, stories replaced grievances, laughter emerged, tentative at first, then freer. She watched the man she loved speak with her family, respectful and calm, and felt a swell of emotion she could barely contain. He watched her move through the room with a lightness he had not seen since before the truth of their surnames had been revealed. The observer of destiny understood then that this was the true consecration of their love, not in defiance, but in reconciliation. Later that night, beneath a quiet sky brushed with stars, he took her hand and spoke of the future, not grand plans, but shared mornings, continued patience, a life built with intention. She answered with certainty, her voice steady, her heart finally unburdened. Their love, once confined to envelopes and distance, now stood openly in the world, no longer needing to hide or prove itself. In time, they married surrounded by families who had learned that love does not erase history, it redeems it. Their story became a quiet legacy, told not as a tale of feud, but as a reminder that persistence guided by compassion can rewrite even the oldest conflicts. And every Christmas after, as they gathered together in warmth and peace, destiny looked on, satisfied that the letters that once carried love across distance had ultimately carried healing across generations. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and leave a comment sharing your favorite moment. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell to receive alerts for new, romantic stories. Thank you for listening, and may your own story be filled with love.